The J&M Café is dark now, not the kind of darkness that comes from after last call, when the staff is still sweeping floors and stacking chairs. This is a deeper quiet, the kind that settles into a place when the doors have been locked for good, when the neon signs have gone cold, and the building is left alone with its memories. You stand outside on First Avenue, looking through the windows that once glowed warm and inviting. The bar stools are still there, the booths, the long wooden bar that held a century of elbows, conversations, and late night confessions. Everything is exactly where it was, just frozen in time. You push the door open, the hinges groan, a long, tired sound, and the air inside greets you like a breath held too long. Still, cool, heavy, the kind of air that feels like it hasn't moved since the last customer walked out. Your footsteps echo as you step inside, not loudly, but enough to remind you that you're the only living person in the room. You walk past the bar, your hand brushing the worn wood. It's smooth in places, rough in others, shaped by decades of hands, drinks, and stories. You can almost hear the clink of glasses, the low hum of conversation, the jukebox playing something old and familiar. But tonight, there's nothing, just the quiet, and the feeling that the building is listening. You move deeper into the room, toward the back where the hallway narrows. The temperature drops a few degrees, not enough to shock you, but enough to make you stop, enough to make you aware of the space around you. The hallway stretches ahead, darker than the rest of the bar. You take a step forward, and the floor creaks beneath you. Another step, another creak. And then something else. A soft shuffle, not yours, not from the street, from upstairs. You pause at the bottom of the staircase. The upstairs was always the heart of the J&M. The music, the crowds, the nights that stretched long past closing. Now it's silent, but as you place your foot on the first step, you hear it again. A slow, deliberate footstep above you, then another, measured, unhurried, like someone pacing the upper floor waiting for a night that isn't coming. You climb the stairs, each step echoing in the quiet. At the top, the room opens into darkness, but you can feel it. That presence, that weight, that sense that you're not alone. You take a few steps forward. The bar stool shifts. Just enough to let you know the J&M Cafe hasn't gone completely quiet. Not just yet. Welcome back to Haunts of the Pacific Northwest. My name's Kevin, and tonight we're stepping into a place that once defined Pioneer Square. A bar, a venue, a gathering spot, and a landmark that carried more than a century of Seattle's history in its walls. The J&M Cafe wasn't just a business, it was a living piece of the city. A place where the past never really stayed in the past. And now that the doors are locked and the lights are out for good, the building feels different, quieter, but not empty. Tonight we're walking through what remains. The J&M Cafe began its life in 1889, rising from the ashes of the Great Seattle Fire. Pioneer Square was a construction zone, bricks, timber, and scaffolding everywhere. And the city was rebuilding itself with a kind of frantic determination. The building that would become the J&M rose quickly, part of the new fireproof district built from brick and stone instead of the wooden structures that had burned so easily. In those early years, the J&M wasn't a bar yet. It was a hotel and card room, a place where loggers, sailors, miners, and railroad workers drifted in and out. Seattle was a frontier city then, rough, loud, unpredictable, and the J&M fit right into that world. The streets outside were muddy, Horses clattered past, the smell of the waterfront carried up First Avenue, and inside, the J&M offered warmth, whiskey, and a place to disappear for a while. Through the early 1900s, the J&M evolved into a full saloon and hotel. The bar was long, the ceilings were high, and the room echoed with the sound of clinking glasses, laughter, and the occasional argument that got a little too heated. Pioneer Square was a magnet for trouble in those days. Gambling, brothels, underground tunnels, and the kind of nightlife that made respectable citizens shake their heads. The J&M didn't shy away from any of it. It was part of the neighborhood's pulse. During Prohibition, the J&M didn't close. It adapted. Officially, it served food. Unofficially, well, Pioneer Square has always been good at keeping secrets. The underground tunnels beneath the neighborhood were used for all kinds of things, and the J&M was no exception. Whispered stories suggest that certain bottles found their way into the building through back doors and side passages, long after alcohol was outlawed. By the mid-20th century, the J&M had mellowed, but never lost its edge. It became a gathering place for workers from the docks and rail yards and the warehouses that lined the waterfront. Generations of regulars carved their initials into the wooden booths. The bar became a kind of living scrapbook. Every scratch, every dent, every stain telling a story. Then came the 1980s and 90s, and with them a new identity. Seattle's music scene was exploding. Pioneer Square was alive with bands, clubs, and late night energy. And the J&M Cafe became one of the neighborhood's anchors. It wasn't the biggest venue or the loudest or the flashiest, but it had history, it had character, and musicians loved it. Local bands played here before they were famous. Touring bands stopped in after shows. The J&M became a place where you could walk in on a random night and hear something incredible. Blues, rock, grunge, folk, whatever the city was brewing at the time. The building itself seemed to absorb the music. The floors shook, the walls vibrated, the air felt alive. When the J&M finally closed, it wasn't just another business shutting down. It felt like losing a piece of Seattle's identity. A place that had seen the city grow from a muddy frontier town to a modern metropolis. A place that had held a century of nights, stories, and people. And here's the part that matters now. The story might not be over. The building has a new owner, someone who understands what the J&M meant to Seattle, someone who sees value in its history rather than a reason to tear it down. Nothing is guaranteed, and the future is still quiet, but there's a sense of the J&M Cafe isn't done yet. The lights are off, the doors are locked, but the building feels like it's waiting, and maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for its new chapter. J&M's hauntings were never theatrical. They were subtle, steady, and strangely personal. The kind of activity that made staff shrug and say, "Yeah, that happens here." Now that the building is empty, those stories feel sharper, like whatever was here doesn't have to compete with the noise anymore. Even when the bar was open, people had heard footsteps pacing the old hotel rooms upstairs. Slow, deliberate steps that moved from one end of the hall to the other. After the closure, contractors reported the same thing. Footsteps in a locked, empty building. A figure seen halfway down the staircase, standing still, watching the room below. Always the same spot, always the same posture. He never moved, he never spoke. He simply appeared and then wasn't there. Long after closing time, a single piano note would ring out from the stage area. Not a melody, not a chord, just one key pressed with intention. Now, with the building dark, people walk past on First Avenue have claimed they still hear a faint tone drifting through the walls. The hallway leading toward the old hotel rooms always carried a strange weight. People described a sudden drop in temperature, the feeling of being followed, or the sense that someone was standing just behind them. Even now, the air back there feels colder than the rest of the building. Bartenders used to see a shadow move behind them in the mirror, only to turn around and find the room still. After the J&M closed, a few people peeking through the windows claimed they saw a shape cross the bar, even though the building was locked and dark. The upper level, once a hotel, held the heaviest energy. Doors that were locked would be found open. Footsteps crossed the hallway when no one was upstairs. And every so often, someone would hear a soft knock on a door that hadn't been used in decades. Now that the building is empty, those sounds seem to carry farther. Walking through the J&M Cafe now feels like visiting a place caught between worlds. The building is closed, the music is gone, and the crowds aren't coming back. But the energy hasn't faded. If anything, it feels more concentrated, more present. Some places don't stop being themselves just because the doors are locked. Some places hold on. The J&M Café was one of those places, a room full of stories, a building full of echoes, a landmark that meant something to the people who stepped inside, and maybe to the ones who never left. And even though the bar is empty now, the feeling remains. The presence remains. The sense that something here is still awake, and maybe waiting. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Haunts of the Pacific Northwest. The J&M Cafe may be closed, but it's still alive in the stories, the memories, and the echoes that linger in the quiet. With this episode, we close out Season 1, a journey through some of Seattle's most iconic haunted bars. And there's more ahead, more places to explore, more stories waiting in the shadows. Next season, we're stepping outside the bars and into some of the Pacific Northwest's most haunted places: theaters, markets, lighthouses, and the places where history refuses to stay quiet. And somewhere down the line, we'll check into a few hotels that have never really slept.